Well, here we are again. My name is Douglas Trainer Snarr. This is disc number 7. Can't believe it. And the date is July 7th, 2015. Now, the last time we were talking, and you were listening, hopefully, I had mentioned that I had made a decision to move to Salt Lake City. Now, I'd like to explain a little bit about that decision. That decision was not a snap decision. There was a little prelude prior to that. And kind of like Emerson wrote, all are needed by each one. Nothing is fair or good alone. I yielded myself to the perfect whole. Well, all are needed by each one. Now that all, in this case, he's talking about people, obviously. Well, the name is Charles Welch Taggart, who influenced me significantly that if you're going to really get in the big league, Doug, you're going to have to move from Idaho Falls, Idaho, to Salt Lake City, Utah. Charles W. Taggart. He was the most interesting person I've ever met. And I have met tons of people in my life. He was brilliant. He was engaging, most dynamic. If you got 25 people in a room and he walks in, everything centers around Charlie. And where I first met him was in Alpine, Wyoming. I was trying to sell a sign to a man named Klinger. He wanted to be called Mr. Klinger, not called by his first name, particularly someone like me that's trying to sell him. So he puts himself in the superior position at all times. Now, he had a big lodge up in Alpine called the Flying A or Flying Lodge or whatever, something like that. I can't remember precisely. But it stood by itself and it was a beautiful building. He was famous because he flew P-40s in the Second World War against the Japanese in Burma. He was in the Flying Tigers. And that was so famous, the Flying Tigers. And he distinguished himself and just became famous. So here this guy comes along, settles in Alpine, Wyoming, gets a little spot, builds this lodge where they all just adore him, look up to him. So he has something wondrous and mystical about him. You never can get down to the real bottom of him, but he has a tremendous image. So I'm trying to sell him some signs. He ended up buying one sign to test and try me out. But as I was walking out of the Flying Lodge, there was a ruckus going on, and a whole bunch of people gathered around. And the center of that was Charles Welch Taggart. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who it was. But all I know is that he had them listening to every word he was saying. And I remember him saying something to the effect, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, which of course is a line from Kipling. But he also said, make ye no little dreams, for they stir no magic in the minds of men. Now that actual quote is this, make ye no little plans, for they stir no magic in the minds of men. But he substituted the word dreams instead of plans. Now, the man that said that was the architect that the city of Chicago hired to reconfigure Chicago after the Great Fire. And he has been quoted by President Kimball, many in the church, many all over. It's a relatively long quote. So he took that top line, make ye no little dreams, for they stir no magic in the minds of men. And I was walking out, and he was elevated above the others because he was standing on a chair. And everybody else was looking up to him. Well, I stopped. And he says, "What's your name?" to me. And I said, "My name is Doug Snarr." Well, he had a photographic memory. He remembered that. And then I left. Well, when I got into the mission field, which was some time later, but not too much longer, in less than a year, Charlie Taggart went in the mission field just before me. And he's the kind of a guy that you couldn't control. He brought a Time magazine with him and lots of other things that weren't really recommended for missionaries. Don't have the time to read them anyway if you're doing the job. But everything evolved around what he wanted to do. So finally, after a while, the mission president wanted to have a talk with him. Invited him to come to the mission office and talk to him. And Charlie kind of just unloaded. He said, "You know, I'm a terrible missionary. I don't like the rules. I don't like anything. I'm a terrible missionary." And the mission president, A. Hamer Reiser, smart enough just to listen to him. When he got all through, A. Hamer Reiser said, "Well, Elder Taggart, what are you going to do about it?" Bang. Now, the mission president was smart. What he did was, he went and changed his venue from being up in the Midlands in England, Sheffield, and moved him to London. He says, "I'm going to make you a district president." So here's a missionary that's been a failure, is given a very high position of being a district president. This is a missionary over other missionaries, responsible for them. Meetings regularly and have to report on how they're doing and so on and on we went. What happened was that Charlie decided he was going to live up to the image of being a mission president. He was smart, very smart, both of them. But the smartest was that mission president. Now, I could go on and on for all kinds of stories about Charlie in that relationship. But where we met again was that the very first Christmas in the British mission where I was serving, the mission president had a big get-together in Liverpool, England. And all the missionaries were invited. A huge facility. We had just about, around 75 missionaries, something like that. And so in this process, this Christmas get-together was a special meeting, a missionary meeting to bear your testimonies. And Charlie was there, and I was there. He gets up first. And he turns to me and he says, Snarr, it's sure good to see you in this mission meeting. He was mocking me. But then he shifted gears and went on. And I've always remembered that. And in a way, it kind of endeared me to him because he handled it just right afterwards. So he turned the negative into a positive for my benefit. One thing they all knew was I was an entrepreneur, and I had my own sign company, and I had signs, and he complimented me in that testimony. Well, now, here I am in Idaho Falls, just completed building the signs for Harris Club, and I happen to be in Salt Lake, and for some reason or another, we get together. I don't know whether we contacted me or I contacted him, but he was living in Salt Lake City. Now, his background is this. He was from a family of 8 children. His father was considered perhaps the wealthiest man in the state of Wyoming, and had the biggest ranch in the state of Wyoming. His father had started a bank. Now, one of the most successful people was Mr. Nielsen, Jim Nielsen, who started Husky Oil. Now, that was later on emerged into a bigger company and ended up with in American Oil by the time it was finished. But he was the one that put up the money to get that company going. So they had holdings there. And the father had been a bishop for 27 years in Cody, Wyoming. And the father was dead serious. And Charlie was the youngest. And when he was a junior in high school, he and his brother were out cleaning up a shed out on the ranch about 30 miles away from Cody. And the only way to get there was on an old dirt road on the ranch. And they had a little fire going, they started, in order to get rid of some of the junk that was in this shed. And one of the things was they picked up, Charlie picked it up, not fully comprehending what it was and its effects, was a stick of dynamite. And he threw that dynamite on that fire. And that dynamite exploded. It knocked Charlie, it was so powerful, the explosion. It knocked Charlie clear over the shed, down. And he just right instantly was a mass of blood. Now the power of that explosion influenced the little bits and pieces of sand and little bits and pieces of this and that, and just penetrated his whole body. And so he carried these scars the rest of his life. Now, his brother took him on in as fast as they could get him. He was unconscious, by the way, and drove on into the hospital, a small hospital in Cody, Wyoming. Now, he was blinded, and his eardrums were knocked out. He was unconscious. Now, his uncle Golden Welch happened to be in the hospital at the time on a priesthood assignment, going around wanting to know if anyone needed a blessing. So here Charlie, his nephew, is in the hospital. This huge emergency. So the uncle comes in, They tell him he's blind and he's deaf. And his hand, about halfway up from that hand to the elbow, was blown off. Right hand. So he blesses him that his sight will return, that his hearing will return. And thus it happened, pursuant to that blessing. Now when Charlie, a couple days later, finally came to, he was really out for quite a while, evidently. And his eye was itching. And he'd take his arm like this, and he trying to get his finger to, his eye. But he didn't have a hand. He didn't know that. Because he could feel that he did have a hand. And so he was trying to get this itch to be alleviated from his eye. Well, what that was, of course, was the hand of his spirit body. It wasn't blown off. It was there. Because there's two of us. We have a spirit body and we have a flesh body. And then they finally told him that when he finally got to where he wanted to know, well, why can't I get this itch that won't go away? And I can't feel my hand. I can't feel my hand on my eye right here. And they told him he didn't have a hand. He said, but I got a hand. I know I can feel my hand. You don't have a hand. It's gone. Well, from that all was morphed eventually into getting a hook. Now, there's two things you can do with the hook. You can hide the hook, or you can display the hook. He opted to display the hook. So, John Farr sitting right there, he remembers as a little kid coming down here. Charlie happened to be here in this house. Charlie had his little hook. Come up, and you just take their put it right there on the nose and just give it a little bit of squeeze right there like that. Remembers Charlie. Well, when you meet him, he's aggressive. People don't know quite what to do, particularly if you're introduced to him. I've seen it over and over again. You stick out that right hand. Grab that hook. The old American way, we shake with our right hands. So then you grab the hook. Well, immediately you like him. And immediately it makes you feel that he likes you. Because he brings you into his life. He doesn't hide the negativity at all. He just turns it into a positive. Because where else are you going to grab a hook? You're never going to forget him. Never. And then the personality along with that was dynamic. Like I said earlier, if you're in a room, there's a bunch of people. Charlie takes control. Now, I have always considered myself an extrovert. But compared to Charlie, I'm an introvert. And he has the ability, because he's scared of no one, and he comes from this very wealthy family in Cody, the Taggart family. And they got to Cody by instruction of the president of the church at the time. And I don't know for sure whether it was Wilford Woodruff or just the one right after him. I don't know for sure. But right in there, Buffalo Bill Cody had gone to the governor of Wyoming, or of the territory of Wyoming at the time, and saying that, we got all this land up here. We need people to come up here and to farm this land. And the governor said, if you want people to come up and do the job right, you go to Salt Lake City and speak to the president of the Mormon Church and get the Mormons to come up, and then it'll be done right. And he did. And Charlie's father is a little tiny boy, so his grandfather, and his grandfather and mother on his father's side, and his grandfather and grandmother on his mother's side, were assigned to take their families and go up and settle Cody, Wyoming. His little father, future father, and his little future mother, two separate families, and they walked from Salt Lake City to Cody. And they became enamored by each other as just little kids, not even old enough to be teenagers, by about 9, 10, 8 years of age. And they eventually married, produced 10 children. But Charlie and I became great friends. And I could go on with stories and long stories. I'll just tell you one story. I get a call from him. He said, Doug, I want to invite you to a special breakfast with myself and Sir Thompson of Fleet Street at the Hotel Utah Coffee Shop. Now, Sir Thompson of Fleet Street owned more newspapers than any man in the world. And he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II because he was Canadian. And so and he said, now, Doug, there'll be just the three of us. But there's no one in the whole newspaper world as big as Sir Thompson of Fleet Street. He owned the London Times, he owned the Sunday Times, and on he went of what he had owned. Well, why is he in Salt Lake City? And what is your relationship with Sir Thompson of Fleet Street, Charlie? He said, he comes here all the time. And I am the one that he's asked to protect me and determine his entire schedule. So that's what I do. So that's how did he get to know him? It's magic to me. I don't know. But it doesn't surprise me. That's Charlie Taggart. He's just the most lovable, beloved guy you could ever meet. He never married. He brought a lot of girls here to this house through the years, and they were all darling girls. They were all gorgeous things. But I know that 2 or 3 of them wanted to marry Charlie bad, but he never married. I know he fell in love with one. He bought her a Mercedes-Benz, oh brother, but it didn't work out. Well, so we're having this breakfast with Sir Thompson of Fleet Street. Why is he in Salt Lake City? Because he has one granddaughter, one only. And he made a study. Where's the safest school I could send my granddaughter to where she'll be less chance of getting pregnant in the world? And his study was BYU in Provo, Utah. Brigham Young University. So now she's down there. So Sir Thompson Fleet Street would come in periodically, and that's Charlie. And he would organize it. So now I'm sitting at this table. And I knew this. The only thing I could do was ask questions. And I can remember one question I asked him. Sir Thompson, what do you read? You own all these newspapers. What do you read for current events to know what's going on in the world? He says, that's a very, very pregnant question. It's a sad question, in fact, because I do not read any of the newspapers I own because I don't trust them. There's only one thing I read, and I carry it in my pocket, and that is The Economist magazine, published in London. That's what I read. And it's a weekly magazine. Now, they call themselves a paper. It's owned by a competing group called the Pearson Group. I've been trying to buy it for years. They won't sell. But that's what I read. Well, I never heard of The Economist magazine, so I write that down in my little diary. And I've been reading The Economist magazine ever since. It's given me an edge nearly over everybody I meet or talk to. It gives me an edge because it is the most well thought out, most complete magazine in the world, is The Economist. And I said to myself, if it's good enough for Sir Thompson of Fleet Street, who travels the world with assets in the world. He did go so far as to say, I'd like to buy the Salt Lake Tribune. I think it's a very poor newspaper, but I think I can make it a good newspaper. But they have turned me down. He did also say that. Well, Charlie died, and he called me just before he passed away. He said, Doug, I've been to the doctor. He'd been in the hospital a few times. They couldn't find out what was wrong. And he went to a doctor in his ward, a cancer specialist. He said, Doug, told me I got cancer of the liver. I got 60 days to live. It's toes up for me, kid. It's toes up for me, kid. Doug, I want you to speak at my funeral. 20 minutes, Doug. If you go over 1 second, I'll come down and I'll hit you over the head with my hook. I said, Charlie, this is serious. Quit your joking. Don't tease me, Charlie. This is serious stuff. Now, he had been teasing me for years. He said, my sister's here. And he handed the phone to his sister. He said, Doug, I was with him when the doctor told him he's got 60 days. Well, he died on the 59th day. That funeral was so packed. President Gordon B. Hinckley was at his viewing. President Faust was at his viewing. And it goes on and on. Coach Lavelle Edwards was at the funeral. You can't imagine the people, and it was standing room only, was at that funeral of Charles Welch Taggart, including some of his brothers and so on. I spoke 19 and a half minutes. It was an honor. An honor I'll never forget. And respect. So Charlie says, Doug, if you're going to build this company, you got to move out of Idaho Falls, Idaho. You got to come down here to Salt Lake City. And so this went back and forth. He said, no, And every time I go down, you got to stay with me. I got plenty. I got room in my apartment. You stay with me. So I was mapping this thing out. And I see it, and I decided to try a dry run. And I don't know how come it happened quite this way, but Gillum Advertising Agency, which was considered, along with Evans, the two paramount advertising agencies in Salt Lake City at the time. But Gillum had an account with a company called Utoko. That's Utah Oil Company, and they had a great big refinery here on the North Highway. So I created a billboard. Now, I didn't do it in 3D. It was in 2D, but it was the way I would go at it. And I created this billboard, went and just walked up. They were located in the Continental Bank building. Went in there. Who should I see? Wendell Ashton. So I went into Wendell Ashton's office, showed him the billboard, introduced myself. He said, "This is a very important piece of artwork you've got here." "Who did that?" I says, "I did." He said, "You're very gifted. You understand advertising, I tell you that right now. You can't drive down the road and not see your sign. And I want to introduce you to the president of the company." Now, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Nelson. So I go in and show him the sign. Liked him immediately. He says, "Well, I'd like to buy a bunch of these, but we can't do that right now, but I'm going to get one. I'd like you to build it on the road, Parties Canyon Highway, coming down into Salt Lake City." And he said, because right now they're talking about changing the name from Utoko to American. Utoko is a subsidiary of American Oil. I built the sign. It's a fantastic sign, by the way. All just typical, unforgettable sign. I put it on steel posts. Brother Nelson was the father of probably the could very well become the prophet of this church in time. He who, as of the death of Boyd K. Packer, his son will be the president of the Quorum of the 12, Russell Nelson. And I've often wanted to go meet him, tell him about his father, how much I appreciated him and what he had done. But it opened a pathway for me to eventually go and meet with the people at American Oil in Chicago. But that's another story. And now, and it was in that matrix of Charlie, the Nelson, getting this one sign done, I decided to make the move. Because there's more opportunity to meet more different kinds of people. It's centrally located, and I can work out of Salt Lake and go in all directions. So the move was made. Now, in making that move, the home is always a question. And I decided that since the home that my parents moved in when I was in the 10th grade, moved in from our little cabin into this nice home that my dad had designed and worked and built, was on top of the high hill, kind of a hill. And we could see from our home uninhibited. You could see clear to Pocatello, 50 miles to the south. You could see the Grand Tetons, 75 miles to the northeast. You could see the LDS Temple, easy. It was uninhibited, the view. We had high ground. You see the airport and all these fields, beautiful, lush fields of potatoes and all kinds of crops, from alfalfa to clover, wheat, barley, oats. All these fields, wonderful. I wanted a view. And so that was the criteria. And this home here, this little home here, 3,000 square feet. I have a view of Mount Olympus, named after the Greek Mount Olympus. I have a view of the valley. I can see 18 miles from north to south, from east to west. I can see the forest, row of mountains, about 50 miles shot. Sunset every night. I don't have anything to inhibit the view, and so every night is Christmas because of all the lights and the houses and everything. And I've watched it fill in, the valley fill in and fill in. And as I mentioned, I paid $27,000 for this. And I remember my mother coming down and she saw this home. And it looked brand new. They were just finishing up the house when I worked out the deal. And she walked to this house and she says, "Doug, you are going to ruin the Snarr name. You'll never be able to pay for it." See, there's the thing that's called the magic of the mortgage. That makes things, changes the dynamic immensely. But I've been in this home now all these years, and I said, the Lord has allowed me to buy this house. Yes, there's going to be bigger homes and all this and all that. That's good enough for me and our little family. I'm going to see what I can do with this property. Now, when I was negotiating to buy this house, I decided, while they were still working on it, it was basically done, but they're still, winding up just a few touch-up spots here and there, that I wanted a wall built. So the idea is this. I'm going to take my house and extend it to the street. And how I'm going to extend that house to the street is I'm going to build 3 rooms, outdoor rooms, between the house and the street. Now, across the street, there were no homes. It was sagebrush and great big boulders and other sized rocks. So I said, I want you to build a wall. It's going to have to be 8 feet tall. And I explained how I wanted it. I wanted it to go just a little over halfway between the house and the street, running this way. Then I want to take, and you're going to divide it. Now, the material that we're going to use for this wall is going to be a cinder block material, but it's going to be designed so that it's got a pattern so that I could take and work off of that and attach whatever I wanted to attach to it on both sides. When you have a piece of property or anything and you divide that up, the property becomes bigger. That's just art. So you can take a rectangle, divide it up into 3 rectangles, and you got more rectangles. And you got 2 sides of each line. So then I wanted it to on the far north end, right to the line of the property to protect me from the home to the north. There are only homes on one side, the west, but not on the east. And I saw in that opportunity. So anyway, and I said, I want you to include that wall into the price of the home. So when I get the mortgage, I don't have to pay for it all right now, just part of the mortgage. And so they did. And that total price was $27,000. A lot of money in those days. Now I got this outdoor room. But then what about the space between the wall and the street? I want to take and draw from these mountains across the street for me, all this land, beautiful big rocks and everything. I want to get those rocks, some of them, and bring them down so I have a rock wall between, right on the edge of the street. There's no sidewalks. Street. Now they told me this, you can't do that. We can't build it 8 feet tall. It's against the code to build it like that. And I said, listen, gentlemen, you are the builders. I'm going to be the owner. I deal with the politicians, not you. You build it. And if they make me take it down, fine. That's not your business. That's my business. But I know dang well it'll stay. Build that wall. So now I'm talking about going to build another wall out of rocks to tie into it. So it'll be 2 rooms with the cinder block, specially designed wall, and 1 big room. And that's the front room. So the one room will be an outdoor kitchen. 1 room will be my spa room, where it connects to my master bedroom, just sliding doors, walk right out there. Walk out of the sliding doors in the kitchen, outdoor kitchen. Then I got my front room. Now, how am I going to get those rocks and put them where I want them? So I go to the Caterpillar company. Now this is a little bit later. This is the following summer. I go to the Caterpillar company. And I introduce myself, and I'd like to rent one of these Caterpillars. Now the tires are as tall as I am. Big rubber tires with a shovel on the front. I says, I want to rent this shovel and this Caterpillar because I need this shovel. Well, you don't even know how to drive one of these things. We're not going to rent one of these to you. I said, I want to tell you something. I was born and raised on these babies. I can drive this. Well, of course, they didn't believe me. And of course, they were right. But I had driven a little tiny tractor on the farm. I had a little experience with, 2 wheels and a third one out in the front. I had a little experience. In this case, the third one was out in the back. And you had the shovel in the front. But, so we started to talk. I said, I want to tell you something. I will not leave until you rent this to me. I have to have it. And finally, they did. And I drove that thing, I don't know how many miles it is, clear through the town, because that was on the far west side. Now we're on the east side, many miles apart. Came on up. I don't know who owned the land. Someone did. But I just went across the street, started to pick up these big boulders. And I went clear out around the whole house, yard, down the sides, and across the back with this rock, semi-rock wall. Big boulders. Now today, if you can get them, boulders of that size are going for about $5,000 a piece. I don't know what I'd have done if I'd had to pay for that. But it was a lot of fun. I think, and I remember when I got on it, I said, gentlemen, I said, this model's a little bit different than my last model. So they showed me exactly how to run the doggone thing. And off I went. Well, it's been my avocation. It's what can I do with that piece of property? I don't want to look like anybody else. I want to be me. An artist can only paint or express what he does from that which he is. And the same with the musician, compose music, can only compose what they are. And so on. And so I started. It's been nearly 54 years, something like that. I'm just about finished. Just about finished. I think I'll have it pretty well down in the next, 2 weeks. Or I can say, I think I finished, that's the front part of the house, not the back, the front. Back has a big hedge. And I can oversee the hedge. Nothing can bother me. They can't see me, but I can see out. I love it. Now, the office. I've got to have a warehouse. I've got to have a plant to work out of. I was caught just right. A lot of these old buildings that have been built by the church and others had reached the point where they're about ready to be torn down and ready for something else. So I just get a hold of the Zion Securities leasing department, and I find a building. And this building is on Richard Street, is exactly one building from the center of this Temple Square, just down one building, and that building in front of it is Beneficial Life Insurance, and right down next to it was an old sign company, and there is embedded right in the sidewalk SIGNS signs, vacant, ready to be rented. I take it. I think it's most appropriate. Then I find a place where I can build the signs, which today is right where the Symphony Hall is located. And that's just kitty corner from Temple Square. And that was an old, beat-up building that was long seen its day, but still, they wanted to rent it. And I took it. So I got plenty of space to build the signs right within half a block from me, basically, to where my office is, as the crow flies. And I look, standing on that street, and I'm looking up at these other buildings, and I see a sign that says Phillips 66, and their logo on that. And then it says Division Headquarters. So I go there. It's up and about, 5 stories up, 6 stories up. I think they took about 4 or 5 stories. And I walk in there. So I want to speak to the number one man over all of marketing. So they bring him in. His name is Taylor. I introduced myself, and I said, is it possible you could give me a copy of all of your material that you have wherever there is an article, anything on your company, materials that you send out to help introduce people to your products that you use for selling and promoting purposes and advertising. I want everything. I want to see what you're doing right now. Well, what do you want to see that for? Who are you? I said, well, I want to tell you something. My name is Doug Snarr from Snarr Advertising. I am going to create an outdoor advertising campaign for you that'll cover 10 states. And he broke out, his name was Dick Taylor. Dick Taylor broke out and he laughed. You are got to be joking. You're wasting your time. You're wasting the money. You'll never sell us in a million years. Our advertising is done by J. Walter Thompson in New York City. It's the biggest agency there at that time. And they have that worked out for the next 4 to 10 years out on the entire advertising. There is no way you can ever sell us. I said, Mr. Taylor, I'm not asking whether or not I can sell it. I buy you because you don't even know who I am. You don't know what I can do. You don't have a clue. But what you've got out there is junk right now on the highways. It's just sheer junk. And I'm going to give you a campaign that is so superior to what J. Walter Thompson has done or probably will be able to do for you. I'm going to do that. All I want is the material. Now, I'm just right down here on Richard Street. I'm just right behind you, right down there. And you and I are going to be talking a lot, and you're going to get to see what I've done. So he handed it to me. He's a young guy, but about, I'd say, 15 years older than me. Nice-looking guy, a lot of energy, just a perfect marketing guy, just a lot of, vinegar in him. And so I took it. Now, I didn't build models like I did for Harris. Harris was a standalone models. This I did was on the face of hardboard. I should say heavy, dense cardboard. And then I would take and build the sign on so it was in three-dimensional. It's three-dimensional, but didn't show the back of the sign and didn't show any of the back braces or anything like that, just the front of the sign. But it was 3D. And it'd throw a little shadow, and it was very, very good. So I sat down and worked out, again, 5 signs. Now, I had to have the theme. Well, the smart thing to do is get what their latest theme is, because you're not going to change that. And that theme was have fun going. That was their slogan. Phillips Petroleum Company. So we start the work, the laborious work of creating these signs. Now, I had hired a guy who graduated from BYU and then went to the Art Center, and Keith Bagley was his name. I called him Bags. We ended up having a watercolor class at BYU. That's where I got to know him, Bags. Boise, Idaho. I'm from Idaho Falls, Idaho. And worked out very nice because we could battle it out between us. But he was doing more of the actual painting of it once we had the layout. I was more involved in the layout, the design of it, how the sign is to be designed, what's going to constitute the ad itself. And he would be the one that would implement that, which would give me up time. Because here I am down there, and I'm selling other people at the same time. So, I'm trying to make it work in this big city of Salt Lake City, and I don't know a soul except Charlie Taggart. Now, Charlie Taggart, you'll be surprised at the people he knew. So next thing, well, Doug, you got to meet this guy. You got to meet this guy. And so he was arranging lunches for me. Now, isn't that wonderful? It's just wonderful. And everybody liked Charlie. So, and here he was. And he was bragging about this guy here, what he's done. He built signs for Bill Harris. He's from the Pacific to the Mississippi. You can just hear Charlie right now. And these guys' eyes are big. Here I am sitting there, 25 years of age. And here Charlie, I mean, I couldn't have anyone better in the whole world than him. And to think that he would do that. Boy, do I owe a lot to Charlie. Well, I get it done. Now, Charlie is watching me do this. And he knows that I'm biting off something that my odds are next to nothing. I didn't have a chance. He knew that. But as these signs developed, he changed. He said, that's better than anything on these highways out here, Doug. You already got something. You got something. So when I get it all done, he says, you know, Doug, there's one person you got to meet. His name is Henry D. Moyle, Jr. Hank Moyle, who is the son of Henry D. Moyle of the first presidency of this church. And Henry D. Moyle was aggressive, a strong personality, and very rich. Now, Henry D. Moyle and two of his brothers had started an oil company early in their business career. Henry D. was the attorney and the negotiator for the other two brothers. And one was kind of an engineer and so on. And they built up a refinery in North Salt Lake. And later on, they sold out and they swapped for stock as well as cash to Phillips Petroleum Company. Henry D. Moyle, because of who he was and how respected he was, at their annual meeting, stockholders meeting, he would introduce, it was a tradition, Boots Adams. And Boots Adams was the chairman of the board and the CEO of Phillips Petroleum Company. And he ran a tight ship, and he was a powerful man. And he had been there right with the very beginning as a very, very young man when the company was first formed and started with the older, more experienced man, and Boots Adams followed him. So there was this relationship. So he said, Doug, I'm going to bring Hank Moyle over and let him see what you've done here. So he brings Hank over. I get to meet Hank Moyle, thanks to Charlie. All are needed by each one. Nothing is fair or good alone. Alone, you're nothing, boy. You got to have influence, and you get that through the right contacts. And Charlie was a gold mine for me. And he enjoyed doing it because he knew I could deliver. Well, Hank sees him. He says, gee, Doug, my dad's got to see this. Doug, how are you going to sell this? I says, I don't have a clue. All I know is that I've always done it by risking. I am willing to risk a lot of money up front to get a big sale. That's how I make it work. He said, I'm going to go and tell my dad about this. So we had a couple of lunches, by the way, and he drilled me with questions on how old I was and all about my family and everything else. And we got together. We even got our two families together, and Hank and his wife and his kids, bango. He goes and sees his dad. And his father said, Hank, tell me, how good are these signs? He said, Dad, there's never been a sign made by Phillips Petroleum Company that's as good as what I've seen. They're the best that the company's ever had. So what the father did was this. He wrote a letter to Kenneth Rue, #1 man over all of advertising of Phillips Petroleum Company. And it's a one-page letter. Now, I've never seen that letter. I've only had Hank tell me what it said. He said, one of my friends has designed an outdoor advertising campaign for Phillips. It is the best that Phillips has ever had. He wants to meet with you. He will call you because I'm giving him your number. Would you please write me back and tell me what you think of his presentation? Talk about knocking a home run, you know. Now, so I was told to wait, you know, for a few days. Because I think he said he'll be calling you shortly. Tell me, you know, what you think about his presentation. So, about a week later, I phoned the number. Now, I don't get to Ken Rue. He puts me down here to a man named Ollie Bettis. And I'm told by Ken Rue's secretary, call Ollie. So I make a second phone call. And Ollie, as you can tell, he is that southern drawl. I will give you 15 minutes and 15 minutes only. And as the time was given, and I had these big cardboard signs, and I had this big space, and how to get them down there and everything else in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Where's Bartlesville? Well, I had a friend who had a friend who lived in our stake up here on the mountain, Mount Olympus. He had his own airplane. He loved to fly. So I call him. How much for a day? You fly me down to Bartlesville. I give my presentation, it's only going to be 15 minutes, and you fly me back. I'd love to do that. Oh, that would be one of the most fun things I've done in a long while. I'll do it. As long as I'm going to charge you is the petroleum cost. That's all. It's just a pleasure to fly you down. So I get down there. I get in that room with Ollie Bettis, an older man. Now I said to myself, I got 15 minutes. I don't have any time for any introduction. They know something already about me because of the letter from Henry D. Moyle. And if he introduces Boots Adams at every stockholder meeting, and has done for many years, and integrated his company into Phillips Petroleum Company, they know that I'm not some guy off the street. Therefore, I got to focus on one thing only. Just show the signs. It's not like with Harrah's Club, or I could explain to them the philosophy of outdoor advertising. None of that business. Just lay it on the line. And so I did, one after another, 5 of them. Got all done. He said, Mr. Snarr, we've given you 15 minutes. I think Ken Rue's got to see this. This surprises me. I must tell you that I wasn't expecting anything like this. So now he phones Ken Rue. So Ken Rue comes down into the meeting. Now, by the time that takes place, I've been there for at least a half hour. Now, Ken Rue came in, kind of dressed the way I am right now, with a tweed coat, natty dressed. You could tell he was a Harvard MBA and the business. Very, very serious and very abrupt and very much in control and demanding, but nice and polite. He sees the signs. He said, Mr. Snarr, would you have lunch with Ollie and me? I said, oh, sure. He says, I want to know all about you. This is better than anything we've ever had at Phillips, right here. And we try and get this advertising agency to use a little imagination, and they just don't have it when it comes to outdoor advertising. I like what you've got here. I'll be honest with you. So we had lunch. Well, I got my pilot out there. Couldn't get back. So now I'm worried about my pilot, and I don't know what to do. And finally I said, well, I got this pilot. And I rented a flight down the back. Invite him to lunch. Bring him along. So he joined us. And that made me feel good, so the pilot could feel like, his time wasn't wasted, that maybe some good might come from it, though I didn't really have a chance to start off with. So that day goes on to, I'd say, at least about 2:30, something like that. And the bottom line was this. We want to set up a meeting in your office in Salt Lake City. We want to have our division people there in charge of advertising, and we will be there. Ollie and I will be there. We want it at 9 o'clock, and he gave me the date. Well, I had this big office complex, and I had the desk here for me, 2 drawing boards, one for Keith Bagley and one for me. And I think I had a desk for a couple of other guys that were working. That was it. Now, I had this plant to build, which was owned by the church, renting from them. It was less than a block away. I said, I got to figure out how to, he's got to know that we're just not some scruds here. So I work it out with Kelly Company to rent 4 desks. Then I want to have 4 girls hired. I want 4 typewriters. I got to have the chairs. I got to make this look like there's at least something going on here. And I remembered I went and got a big bowl. We got to have fruit in here, nice fresh fruit. And just napkins, and they can have a little bit of a plate and so on. And it was early in the morning. You might want to have a little something. And then the night before, I said, Bags, what we got is not good enough. We got to do one more sign. Doug, you're nuts. Doug, they're coming here because of what you've already done. You don't want to get them thinking about all this other stuff. Focus on what they've done, because they'll make a decision based upon what you've got. I said, Bags, we're going to do one more sign. Doug, that'll take all night. I know it. And I'll be here right with you all night. And we're going to do it. One more sign. So there'll be 6 signs. So we're going to let them know we're flexible. Bags, the flexibility of your adaptability is the true measure of your intelligence. Now, one more sign. One more sign. So we worked out the sketch, and I sat there with Bags and encouraged him. I said, now you can implement this. I got the idea for you. I sketched out the sign for you. Now you implement it. And he did. We finished at 15 to 5. Well, we got to go home, be back there by 9 o'clock. Sooner than that, because we got to get these girls organized. So I told them to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning and get these desks and everything organized. Of course, the desk came in the day before, by the way. So this looks like all this busyness going on, see. And so they came in on time. And they had Dick Taylor was there. He was in a state, he was staggered by the fact that not only did they not show interest, they flew clear to Salt Lake City to check me out and to see what the situation was. And I said, well, I'm going to exaggerate about the office, but my working plant, that's my business. So what? It's not fancy or flashy, but I've got enough space there I can build the signs. Make a long story short, they bought 150 signs. In today's market, that would be between $10 to $12 million. I got a 4-year contract. They pay me that money over a 4-year period. I own the signs. So that gives me an opportunity to renew. I did renew those signs for another 4 years. I made a lot of money on Phillips Petroleum Company. They bought one sign from those 6 signs. It was the last sign. The only one they bought was that last sign. That was a miracle. I've had 2 miracles in the business world. One was Harrah's Club, where they came to me. One was Phillips, where Charlie Taggart helped to organize for me a friend, Hank Moyle Jr., right into the first presidency. A letter. And from that, I made the sale. Like they say in the business world, the sale is never made. And in my case, you make the sale, but you got a second sale to make. Because where are you going to get the money, Doug, to build the signs? So I needed at least, in today's money, a loan for $5 million. And I'm sitting in Salt Lake City. That works to my disadvantage. So going up into the Bank of Idaho and asking them to finance this, they've already financed one, Harris, for $7.5 million in today's money. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go back and Bank of Idaho and say, hey, I got me another contract. This time it's Phillips Petroleum Company. You're not going to have a special agreement that in the event of a collapse of the company that Mr. Harris, in the case of the Harris Club, will personally guarantee it. You don't need any personal guarantees. I've got that with Phillips Petroleum Company. Well, I went back, went through my little pitch. He said, well, Doug, we've loaned you $7.5 million. That's a lot of money. You're going to have to get a second bank to finance the Phillips Petroleum Company billboards that they bought from you. Well, where do I go? I don't know anybody in the banking world in Salt Lake City. And so what I thought what I would do is go to the biggest bank in the state of Idaho, which is the Idaho First National Bank, and see them. Now, you always need an introduction. In the case of the Bank of Idaho, the introduction was the bank in Idaho Falls, the Bank of or in Rexburg in those days, the Bank of Commerce. That was an introduction. Just have them call me, which they did do, by the way. And the president of that bank spoke very highly of me and was very encouraging, and the Bank of Idaho's bought off. I've already told you the story. Now this Idaho First National Bank is a whole different breed. We don't have a James Byers. We have a whole different, more of a bureaucratic organization. But I got to the number 2 man named Tom Fry. Never smiled. Just kind of looked at you. Showed them the contract. And they said yes. But we had to give them a lot of information. A lot of information. They wanted confirmation all down the line. I didn't have that with the Bank of Idaho. They just knew that I had no really experience. They just went with me. And one thing I'd like to mention at this point that I haven't mentioned before. My brother, just younger than me, Jim, Merlin James Snarr was his full name, named after my father, Merlin. But Jim, I approached. He really has a lot of personality. I've already mentioned that to you. And if he would be willing to get the locations, and I made it very, very rich for him, a very good deal to get the locations. Now, he got the locations for the Harris Club. I want to give him credit for that. And what he did was a remarkable job. Jim just had a lot of personality, and he was smart. Very smart indeed. Now, on Phillips, he agreed to get the locations. And he got every single one. So I'm giving him credit to find those locations. And I do not know where I could have gone and found someone of the quality and ability to get those locations like Jim. Now, I thought long and hard about maybe working him a deal and bringing him into the company, but I was advised against not doing it. And I don't want to get into that story because it gets involved. But, and the premise of the advice I received was, he is not over the problem of sibling rivalry. And therefore, Doug, don't do it. And the man that recommended for me not to do that, I respect immensely, and I believe that was extremely good advice, and I definitely did the right thing. Well, we got those signs built. I got the money. Now, I always try when I have time on a presentation, to somehow integrate a saying or something like that into it. And to help somehow to give me and where I can present myself in a context of not just a plain businessman that doesn't know anything beyond the subject matter at hand. So I found it important to be able to have a quotation of some kind to leave. And since we're talking about a sign approach, and my signs are vertical, and everyone else's is horizontal, I quoted Emerson. I've referenced this to you before, but I made that part when Ken Rue came to meet with me. This was my quotation from Ralph Waldo Emerson. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. And so from that I said, the foolish consistency is making all signs the same manner, and that is a horizontal rectangle. This is not. This is free form. This is designed just for you. You'll have no one else on the highways will have your shape of that sign. And it's going to draw attention. And I'd rather sell a teenager or a young person than I would an older person. So if I can appeal to a younger person with a little cartoon and do it just right, then I establish a sale that could go on and on and on. The likelihood increases immensely rather than a 70-year-old, 60-year-old person. I'd rather sell a kid. So let's have some fun with these signs. Let's have a little humor. And let's have fun going, which was the slogan. They bought off on that. A foolish consistency, a foolish tradition is the hobgoblin of little minds. We're not that. We're new and big thinkers. And that extra sign, that extra piece of artwork, proved that I myself wasn't bound to tradition. We've got 5 already. That's all we need. No, we're going to give them one more to look at. So they know that I want this sale. And with that letter that goes back to the first presidency of this church will be positive. I wanted that. And Henry D. Moyle got a very positive letter from Mr. Kenrue. That I know through Hank Moyle. Now where do we go? I'm kind of doing pretty good. My name is being battered around a little bit in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is a hard city. It's a difficult city because there's so much talent. And the reason there's so much talent is because of all these returned missionaries. Because the mission is really the Lord's university. And they learn things, and I learned things from the mission of how to approach people, how to knock on a door, how to get through the door, how to make the most of it. They gain a confidence that they can get no other way. They can't get that out of a book. I don't care how many books, they can't get that out of getting 101 degrees. It only is just the experience. And one thing that most missions and missionaries experience is the word no. So how do you deal with no? You can't let it beat you. So you got to keep on pushing forward. So I had that advantage. But Salt Lake is not easy. It is really hard. And the people in Utah are different, the culture, than what I experienced in Idaho. I'm going to be brutal here a little bit. And I heard this little statement battered around. It surely didn't originate with me. That in Utah, the culture is you'll be known by your roots. In Idaho, you'll be known by your work. So very conscious here of one's heritage. But the problem with that is that that becomes a crutch rather than what you are. Now, that's not prevalent in all situations, far from it. But there is that kind of overlaying attitude that is somewhat prevalent and more intense in certain people than in others, because the roots are very important and embedded into the culture of the Mormon people. But the Mormon people up in Idaho, it isn't quite that way from my experience. More open. And what are you able to do? And there's more of a mix. And so I felt myself kind of like an outsider looking in. And I have to overcome that. And the only way I can overcome that is to not think about it, act like it doesn't exist. So what? I'm not going to change anybody. All I can do is be me. So rather than to hang on what could be easily deemed as a negative, to me it doesn't really exist. And so you grin and bear it and move forward and make the best of it. And I think in that context, that was the difference. And I started to sell signs left and right. And I had the pictures, I had the photographs, I had the foundation, and now I had the Idaho First National Bank. So they said to me, we are interested in, this was later on, the possibility of bringing all your banking together under one roof, our roof, with the exception of the Bank of Idaho and Harris Club. That's separate and apart from the deal. Now at that time, I'd open up accounts with First Security Bank, $100,000 line of credit. I'd opened up accounts at in Provo, the Central Bank of Provo. I had accounts spread around in about 4 or 5 banks in Utah and a few other small ones in Idaho. One was the Bank of Commerce. So to keep track of everything, all these bank accounts. So that became very appealing. But I was to learn later on that's not so smart. Get everything under one roof and make it easy. Because they control you. But when you got many of them out there, I've got more options. I am more in a position to think for myself. So it is true, all are needed by each one. Nothing is fair or good alone. I yielded myself to the perfect whole. The perfect whole is not one bank. And I'll go into that and what happens next on disc number 8. And I think I'm at the end of my rope today, and it was fun. I've enjoyed doing this a great deal. And so we'll see you on disc number 8. Thank you.